Hello and welcome to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. It was the biggest test of public opinion outside of a general election, with every adult in Britain having the chance to have their say. And in terms of drama and significance, the 2021 elections really did deliver. A pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament that could define the future of the Union. The Conservatives in power for 11 years and still putting on seats. And a Labour Party grappling with a crisis that seems almost existential. With a political realignment that now seems undeniable, can the party ever win power again? We'll be exploring all of those issues on the programme today, joined by Michael Gove, who's going to be discussing the future of the United Kingdom and whether the government would ever grant a referendum on Scottish independence. The Shadow Scotland Secretary Ian Murray will be talking about a difficult set of election results for the Labour Party. And the former Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbot will also be giving her take on what those results mean for Labour. The Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey will be here in the studio to talk about how his party fared in Thursday's elections. Plus, we'll be speaking to the SNP's Deputy Leader Keith Brown about what that pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament really means. First, though, we can go straight to Glasgow, where we're joined now by the Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr Gove. So the Scottish Parliament now has a pro-independence majority elected by the people of Scotland. Will the UK government respect that and grant an independence referendum?
Well, the first thing to say is you're quite right that Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish National Party got the largest number of seats in this election. So my congratulations to Nicola and her team on their result. And also my congratulations to others who've been elected in the Scottish parliamentary elections. We now have a more diverse team in Holyrood representing different parties and different communities than ever before. And that's a good thing, a sign that democracy is strong and resilient and growing. But the priority, I think, for politicians, not just in Holyrood, but across the United Kingdom at the moment, has to be recovery from the pandemic. And Nicola Sturgeon herself made clear during the campaign that her first priority, her top priority, would be working to make sure that we can come out of this pandemic and recover.
That is, as you say, exactly the same thing as the SNP have been saying. They've said that they want to focus on the recovery from COVID. They've said that now isn't the time to push immediately for a referendum on the independence. But that wasn't quite my question about the timing. I'm asking if the principle of a second referendum on independence is something that the UK government would grant. Because right now, if you look at the SNP and if you also look at the Scottish Greens, who are another pro-independence party, there is a clear majority for independence in the Scottish Parliament. If they pass legislation in order to move to another referendum, would you block it?
No, what we're concentrating on doing at the moment is making sure that we work together to deal with all of the challenges that we face across the whole United Kingdom. Now, my mum will have woken up this morning in Aberdeen, and the first question on her mind will not have been, will we or won't we have an independence referendum? Will we or won't we have another few years of wrangling over the Constitution? The first question in my mum's mind will be, what about my grandson and granddaughter's education? What about the NHS care that my family need? What about the jobs that I hope that my grandchildren will go on to enjoy? Those are the priorities at the moment. And if we get sucked into a conversation about referenda, constitutions and all the rest of it, then we're diverting attention from the issues that are most important to people in Scotland and across the United Kingdom. And I hope that what people want from the Holyrood government and also from the Westminster government is a commitment to work together on these issues. So instead of concentrating on the things that divide, let's concentrate on the things that unite, and let's concentrate on all of us working together to serve the people who just voted for us.
I'm sorry to your mother if I'm not asking the questions that she most wants to be answered. But the question that I am asking is, if the Scottish Parliament passes a bill...
She still watches Sky anyway.
Well, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. If the Scottish Parliament does pass a bill to hold a referendum, how will you react? Will you take it to court?
Well, I think how I would react, how the people of Scotland would react to any attempt to bring forward legislation like that.
I'm asking how you would react as a spokesperson for the UK government.
Well, I think most people would react by thinking, hold on a moment. You're really saying that the priority, when we still have this vaccination program that we need to roll out, when young people need their jabs in their arms, when we acknowledge that people have spent months out of school with learning lost and with their opportunities as a result occluded, do you think that people are really going to say, do you know what we really, really want is legislation on a referendum? To my mind, I'll put it gently, a slightly skewed set of priorities to imagine that that is the most important issue. Indeed, as I say, during the course of this campaign, Nicola Sturgeon, to her credit, said that the most important thing was making sure that we dealt with this pandemic. And that's what we're laser focused on. And one of the reasons that I'm here in Glasgow is that the Cabinet Office, the government office in the UK government that I work for, has a new headquarters here, so that we can work alongside local authorities, the NHS and others, in order to show two governments working together. And my sense actually is that for a lot of people who voted SNP, the one thing that they wanted was continuity in dealing with the pandemic and concentrating on that.
It's a very specific question. If the Scottish Parliament passes legislation to move towards another independence referendum, will the UK government block it in the courts?
No, we're not even going there at the moment. What we're concentrating on is making sure that we work on recovery.
But
Nicola Sturgeon was asked
if they pass a bill to hold a referendum, will the UK government take it to the Supreme Court?
We're not going to go there. What I'm going to do is to make sure that we do everything we can to concentrate and focus on recovery. Because again, during the course of the election debates, Nicola Sturgeon graciously acknowledged that the Scottish Government had made some mistakes in the past. In particular, she said that they'd taken their eye off the ball when it came to dealing with the terrible problem of drug deaths here in Scotland. It's our responsibility to make sure that no one in Holyrood takes their eye off the ball when it comes to dealing not just with drug deaths, but also with the backlogs that have been generated in public services in the pandemic, and also the economy. So to go down this route, to start speculating about this type of legislation or that type of court hearing and all the rest of it, it's just a massive distraction. And as I say, I cannot believe that people who are worried about their jobs, worried about the extension of furlough, worried about what's happening to their children's education, I cannot believe that they think that the answer to all of these things is a protracted debate on the Constitution. We all know that what we need is urgent, focused action on that. So, I'm not interested in going down that blind alley. What I am determined to do is to work with Nicola and her team, and of course Mark Drakeford, to whom I also offer my congratulations, re-elected as the First Minister of Wales, in dealing with the immediate problems we face.
You're talking about not wanting to go down this blind alley. You're saying this is not what voters care about. But the very reason that I'm asking these questions is because on Thursday, the people of Scotland elected a majority of MSPs to their parliament who clearly are in favour of an independence referendum. That's how democracy works, isn't it? That's why we're talking about it. That's why it's on the table. If they pass legislation, I'm going to ask you for a third time, if they pass legislation to move towards another independence referendum, will the UK government block it in the courts?
Well, if we look at what happened during that campaign, it's important to recognise the issues that were raised and the questions that were asked. And when Nicola Sturgeon was on the BBC and she was asked, what would you say to someone who didn't want an independence referendum, but thought that you, First Minister, were the right person to steer Scotland through the next stage of the pandemic? And she said unhesitatingly, I would tell that person to vote for me. So again, Nicola herself has acknowledged, and again, I think it's gracious of her to do so, that there are people who will have voted for her because they want her to carry on with pandemic cooperation, the spirit of continuity in that area, and who are not putting independence first. The other thing, of course, is that if we look at the votes cast, if you look at the votes cast in constituencies in Scotland, more people voted for parties that were opposed to an independence referendum than those that might entertain that prospect. So again, I think it's critically important to look at this debate in context. And again, one of the things that I think we should all be focusing on, and citizens expect us to focus on, are what are our plans in order to improve delivery in the NHS, in education, in criminal justice, in all of the areas that matter most to voters. Nobody denies that during this campaign that the number one issues were health and the economy, and that's what people expect us to focus on.
Are there any circumstances where Boris Johnson might agree to a second independence referendum?
Well, it's not an issue for the moment. Of course, the people of Scotland, as we saw in the referendum in 2014, they have that right. But it is absolutely important that we concentrate now on the issues in front of us. And of course, one of the things to bear in mind is that while Nicola Sturgeon obviously secured a good result, the SNP did not get a majority in this election, as they did in 2011. In 2011, the SNP under Alex Salmond got a majority. A referendum then followed. It's important to remember that at that time, every party in the Scottish Parliament thought that it was appropriate to hold a referendum then. The SNP did not get a majority in this election. And also, critically, we had a campaign in which all of the party leaders acknowledged that the single most important thing was dealing with the pandemic. And I think that a movement away from that would be something that voters would, I think they'd feel, well, disappointed, to put it mildly, that we were not concentrating on their priorities.
At the same time, though, the reason that we're talking about this is because there is a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. If you look at the Scottish National Party and also the Scottish Greens, you're talking about people voting for many different reasons, not everyone backing Nicola Sturgeon purely on independence. I'm sure, of course, people do vote for different things. But, we're talking about the Scottish National Party here. I mean, it's not exactly as if they've hidden their support for another independence referendum under a bush, is it?
Well, to be fair, they certainly haven't put it front and centre in the shop window, tied up with a big bow and said, this is our major offer. Quite the opposite.
Scottish National Party.
Again, to be fair, yes, and to be fair, the SNP and the First Minister made it clear that their priority was to deal with the pandemic. And indeed, again, to be fair to the First Minister and the SNP, week in, week out, I meet with Nicola Sturgeon, Mark Drakeford, and of course Arlene Foster and Michelle O'Neill from Northern Ireland to discuss how we can work together. And in private, we have I hope Nicola would agree, a business-like and effective relationship in making sure that we can work together, overcome our divides, and make sure that the people of the United Kingdom benefit from that joint working. So, yes, of course, the SNP has a set of policies and a set of traditions, but they also have a responsibility at the moment, which their First Minister has outlined, to concentrate on recovery. And again, we have a Queen's speech coming up in the Westminster Parliament in just a few days' time. At its heart are a series of bills and measures which will strengthen our NHS. And again, I think if you were to ask most people in Glasgow if there was going to be a conversation between the Prime Minister and the First Minister, would you like that conversation to be about the Constitution, or would you like that conversation to be about getting hospitals to do a better job, additional support for doctors and nurses, dealing with the drug death problem that we have here? I think if you had a referendum on the question of whether or not they should be talking about the Constitution or the NHS, I think it would be the NHS by a landslide, and that's what we need to do.
Well, let's talk a bit about the conversations that are going to be had between the Prime Minister and the First Minister, because Boris Johnson has invited Nicola Sturgeon to a summit with other First Ministers. Of course, this is going to be a lot about, the COVID recovery and the pandemic, but do you expect independence to be discussed there as well?
Well, I would hope not, because the purpose of it is to make sure that we work together on the pressing issues that face us. Now, of course, Nicola Sturgeon, Mark Drakeford, Arlene Foster, Michelle O'Neill may well want to raise, individual issues. quite right too. It's a broad, inclusive conversation. But the aim of the conversation is to see how we can work together even better. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we have been cooperating to deal with the pandemic. We can also learn from one another. One of the things about devolution is that you can have, as they have had in Scotland and Wales, a slightly different approach tailored to the unique circumstances of each country, but under the broad umbrella of a UK-wide strategy. And in that conversation, one of the things that we can do is both learn from each other's experience over the last year, but also develop a shared understanding of where our priorities need to be in the future. How can we use the broad shoulders of the UK Treasury in order to ensure that there is the right investment in the NHS in Scotland and the right support for Scottish students to catch up on their education?
Let's talk a bit about the what happens next with the recovery from the pandemic, because we're told that the Queen's speech is going to be focusing on, building back. One of the areas that has been really hit hard by COVID-19 is care homes, an area, of course, where the difficulties in that particular sector have also been very much exposed by the pandemic too. Now, when he became Prime Minister, Boris Johnson said, "I'm announcing now on the steps of Downing Street that we've fixed the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared." Now, this mysterious clear plan seems like it's never really appeared. Are we going to finally get a glimpse of it?
Yes, we'll be saying more about social care in the weeks and months to come. You're absolutely right. It's a huge issue. With an ageing population, with the particular challenges that dementia, Alzheimer's and other conditions pose, we do need to make sure that we improve the operation of our social care system. We also know that while there are some outstanding care providers, people like Robert Kilgour and others, it's also the case that there are some settings which do not maintain the high standards that we'd want. So we need to look at funding. We need to look at inspection. We need to look at how we can make sure that we get the investment required. We need to look at how we can improve quality. And Helen Whately, the Care Minister, and Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State, have been developing a plan on this, and we'll be saying more in due course, absolutely.
You say more in due course. What does that mean? Is it going to be in the Queen's speech?
Well, the Queen's speech will be concentrating on particularly how we can improve the operation of the NHS, the additional funding that will be required in order to deal with the immediate problems that we face. We've got a significant backlog in the NHS, quite a
Is that a no, then?
Well, we'll be saying more in the immediate aftermath. Well, one thing I can't do is reveal everything that's going to be in the Queen's speech. I mustn't preempt Her Majesty.
At the same time, I understand you can't reveal everything, but, we were told 2 years ago that there was a clear plan ready to go.
Oh, sure.
There's still no sign of it.
Well, people, I think, will appreciate that we've been concentrating, quite rightly, on the immediate challenges posed by the pandemic. People will also expect, of course, a new plan for social care to be developed, and that plan will be unveiled later this year.
OK, talking about COVID-19, Public Health England this week elevated one version of the Indian variant, the so-called Indian variant, to a variant of concern. How worried are you about this, and could it slow down the easing of the roadmap?
Well, I'm genuinely worried, as everyone should be, about the instance of variants of concern. But there's no indication at the moment that it needs slow down the relaxation that we have as part of the roadmap. The Prime Minister will be saying more about this this week. One of the things that we do is that we have a very effective testing regime. We make sure that whenever we note a spike in the instance of any variant of concern, that we surge testing into that area. There are other options available to us in order to make sure that we can control the spread and the rate of infection in those areas. But overall, thanks to the success of the UK vaccination programme, and also the good sense of people across the United Kingdom, we can progressively relax measures. So I anticipate that the Prime Minister tomorrow will signal that we can enter the next stage of relaxation in England on May the 17th. And as the Transport Secretary indicated yesterday, that means also that some of the rules on international travel are changing as well.
Talking about those rules on international travel, what should happen to the Champions League final? Do you think it should be held in the UK now that Turkey's been put on the red list?
Well, I'm party pre here because my son is a Chelsea fan, and he would dearly love to see the game played in the UK. But there are delicate negotiations that are going on at the moment. My friend, my colleague, the Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, is talking to people about this at the moment, and so I don't want to cut across that. But I'm sure that fans in the UK would dearly love to see the final played here in the UK.
Just finally, we're going to be talking to Diane Abbot shortly, also Ian Murray of the Shadow Cabinet soon. It's been a very difficult set of elections for the Labour Party in England. Who do you think should carry the can for it, the leader or the party chairman?
Well, I don't wish to intrude on internal debates in the Labour Party. People go into public life, people go into politics because they want to serve. And so, Ian Murray, Diane Abbot, Keir Starmer, others, while I may disagree with them on lots of issues, they want to do the best for their country. So I shan't comment about those sorts of things. I'm sure that Ian and Diane will have far more interesting things to say about that than I could possibly have.
Is it helpful to have a strong opposition for democracy?
Yes.
OK. Michael Gove, thank you very much. One of your famous one-word answers there. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
That was Michael Gove. Well, let's try and talk, shall we, to the Labour Party and get to the bottom of the fallout of those parties' disappointing election results. We're talking now to the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbot, who joins us now. What's your reaction to the results that we've seen?
In many ways, they're disappointing results, although we did have very good results in London and in Wales and in Manchester. So it's not a uniform picture, but certainly some results were disappointing, and it was very distressing to lose Hartlepool.
It's interesting that you pick out the three areas, London, Wales, Manchester, where you think Labour did better. Places where Labour has different figureheads, shall we say, to the national leadership in Andy Burnham, Mark Drayford and Sadiq Khan. Do you think that this perhaps suggests that it is a leadership problem?
I think it's a strategy problem. When Keir Starmer was first elected as leader, he talked about unifying the party, and he talked about not oversteering away from the policies under Jeremy Corbyn. He needs to go back to that way of thinking. I think sacking Angie Rayner, for instance, is not a unifying thing to do. I think we need to be building on the policies in the 2019 manifesto, many of which were forward-thinking and popular. We need to get the strategy right.
You're talking about going back to the policies or building on the policies from the 2019 manifesto. Some people listening to that might think that is quite a staggering thing to say. You know, that was your worst result since 1935. You lost 59 seats. Isn't that a manifesto that failed?
It was a manifesto that, taking the policies individually, was very popular. There's no doubt that the party leadership came under fantastic media attack, but the actual policies were popular.
The policies might have been popular individually, but as a whole, they weren't popular, were they? They led to your worst defeat since 1935.
They polled well. Of course we had a terrible defeat. You don't need to remind me that it was a terrible defeat. But, you know, extraordinary media attack on the party and on our leader at that time. So we now have a chance to regroup, to unify and put forward those popular policies.
I've spoken to Peter Mandelson over the last few days. He, of course, the former Hartlepool MP, you were talking earlier about the disappointing result in Hartlepool. He says Jeremy Corbyn is still casting a dark cloud. He's largely responsible for some of the losses that we've seen. Do you accept that, you know, long Corbyn, if you like, is affecting Labour's chances still?
Well, we won Hartlepool twice under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and importantly with a bigger proportion of the vote. I mean, you can't say that Jeremy is responsible for the Hartlepool result. The disaffection in post-industrial Britain long predates Jeremy's leadership, and we have to look at the roots of it.
Let's talk a little bit about Keir Starmer and what he needs to do, in your view, going forward. You talked a bit about policy. Do you think that there is a wider strategy issue that Keir Starmer needs to do, talking a bit more about his vision? John McDonnell, for example, saying that some of those candidates were sent out naked with no vision, no policies. Is that something that you would agree with?
I think that Keir Starmer needs to go back to what he said when he was elected as leader, and he wants to build, yes, on some of the policies which we were talking about in 2019. It is important that candidates can talk about the Labour Party's vision and talk about our policies.
Is it right that Angela Rayner should lose her job as party chair?
I said earlier, I think it's baffling why he sacked Angela Rayner. She didn't take any of the big decisions around Hartlepool, and we've not heard anywhere in the country people saying they didn't vote Labour because of Angela Rayner.
What do you think it says about Keir Starmer's leadership if the first thing that he does is to reach out and sack Angela Rayner, who, of course, is a working-class woman? She's from the north. Some people would say that she is the kind of person that you need to reconnect in some of the areas that you lost.
I think it's puzzling to sack Angela Rayner, and it really is unfair to have her take.
I think we have lost the line there to Diane Abbot. Oh, no, you're back. Good news. Excellent. Is the party too London-centric? I know you're a London MP yourself, of course, so it might be a bit of a difficult question to answer. But there has been criticism for the current Labour Party for being too metropolitan, too London-centric, not reaching out to the towns and the more traditional areas of the United Kingdom that Labour's traditionally done well in.
I don't accept that at all. I'm a East London MP. I'm speaking to you from East London, and we have as much child poverty as anywhere else in the country. We have very large numbers of blue-collar workers. I think it's in many ways an artificial distinction between so-called London elites and the rest of the country. What we need to do is bring together Hackney and Hartlepool in policies which speak to the issues that both types of Labour supporter have in common.
Do you think this is existential for Labour? It is extraordinary when you look at some of the results, for example, losing Hartlepool for the first time since it was created, losing the majority on Durham Council for the first time in 100 years. For many people, the 2019 election was seen as rock bottom, but if anything, Labour's gone backwards. Are you worried that Labour, with this realignment, may not be able to win power again?
Not at all. I'm old enough to remember in the 80s, Eric Hobsbawm wrote a very widely circulated article on the forward march of Labour halted. And his thesis was that Labour was in an existential crisis. It wasn't true then, and it's not true now. We need to unify, we need to regroup, and we need to move forward.
Should a reshuffle be on the cards?
Well, I mean, you probably know as much as I do. People are talking about a reshuffle. But I think generally it's a mistake to focus on personalities. We need to get the strategy and the policies right.
I spoke, just finally, I spoke to Andy Burnham yesterday, who, of course, as you said, was re-elected as Mayor of Greater Manchester, increasing his vote share. He said that if in the future, the distant future, the Labour Party should need him, he's there, they should give him a call. Is now the time to be dialling Andy Burnham's number?
It's not for me to dial Andy Burnham's number, but it's interesting that he's saying that he would pick up the phone to the party leadership.
OK. Diane Abbot, thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning. Thank you. Well, that was Diane Abbot, the view from the Labour left. We can get some reaction to some of what she said in that interview from the Shadow Cabinet. We're joined now by the Shadow Scotland Secretary, Ian Murray, who joins us from Edinburgh. Just firstly, your reaction to the Diane Abbot interview. She says that actually the right thing for Keir Starmer to do now is to go back to the popular policies of the 2019 manifesto. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I really don't want to be responding to Diane Abbott. I want to be responding to the country, because Dan said a few things that actually were absolutely right. We need a policy platform that speaks to the entirety of the country. We had a very mixed set of results over the last few days. We've won our moralities back, as you said, in Merseyside, in Manchester, Bristol, the west of England, and also in places like Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We won from the Conservatives. We won a lot of seats from the councils in what you might call the blue wall, but we still got a problem in the red wall, and it's too soon after the triple problems that we've had of the most dreadful 2019 general election result. We've had the COVID pandemic, and we've had a post-Brexit Britain. We've got to respond now to what communities are telling us. And from what I heard on the doors right across the country, voters are willing to listen to the Labour Party again, but they're just not making that step yet to vote for us. And that's why Keir Starmer has to speed up the reforms in the party, speed up the policy making process. And to be slightly fair, and people have completely missed all of this, in the last 14 months, all of the oxygen in politics in this country has rightly been taken up by coping with this pandemic and seeing what happens after the pandemic. Now that we're coming out of that, it gives Keir a really good chance now to supercharge what he wants to do in terms of policy and wants to do with the party. And as Diane says, talk to everyone from Hackney to Hartlepool and all four corners of the country in terms of what Labour's perspective is for the future.
You just described what happened on Thursday as a mixed set of results for the Labour Party. This is an election where, you lost Hartlepool for the first time since that seat was ever created. You lost control of Durham Council for the first time in 100 years. You were humiliated in the Tees Valley mayoral contest. Even in places where you hung on, you were down 9 seats in Sunderland, down 6 seats in Oldham Council. Some people listening will be like, you don't have a grip on what's going on here. You've just described it as a mixed set of results. The Conservatives have been in power for 11 years. It's not a mixed set of results for the Labour Party, is it?
Well, Sophie, I did say that we've got problems in the red wall, and that includes Durham and Sunderland and Hartlepool. I said that is a real problem for us. We have taken 30 seats in Wales, which is a great result for the Labour Party in Wales. We've been in power there for 22 years. We're back on the park in the Scottish context. We've held the large moralities. We did win a few council seats. But yes, of course it's a disaster in Sunderland and Hartlepool. Nobody is taking away from how bad that is. In fact, we should have lost the Hartlepool seat back in 2019. We've got a long way back to go. I think there's been about a 3 or 3.5% swing, a uniform swing across the country from the Conservatives to Labour. So we're making progress. It's not fast enough. It's not good enough. We have to re-engage. Nobody's taking away the significance of the things that you've just said, but also we have to talk up the things that have gone well. And we've got a lot of listening to do. We've got a lot of speeding up of those reforms to do. We've got a lot of speeding up of the policy process to talk to those things that the public have been telling us they want the Labour Party to talk about. Jobs, our public services, the future of our economy, post-Brexit Britain, the climate. These are all big, big issues we need to start getting on to putting forward that positive policy platform that will speak to all four corners of this country. Nobody's doing down the fact that we've had a disastrous set of election results in some parts of the country, but we also have had some very good election results in other parts of the country too, which is why it's a mixed bag.
I'm just going to... Sorry, you say you've had good election results in some parts of the country. Just, you're down a seat on the London Assembly. In the English councils, you're down 7 councils. In Wales, admittedly, you've done well. That is the one place it feels like you've done well. In Scotland, you're also down seats in the Scottish Parliament. In what world is this making progress? It's not making progress. You're going backwards, if anything.
Well, we're not making progress quickly enough, and that's something that Keir Starmer said. He's taking full responsibility.
Other than Wales, where are you making progress?
We won the west of England. We held on to Bristol. We held on to Manchester. We held on to Merseyside.
Overall, in England, you were going backwards.
You can't, Sophie, say on the one hand we're doing very badly, but not recognise for the places where we've done quite well. We know this has been a bad few days for the Labour Party. The progress that we want to make isn't good enough. But on the one hand, you can't talk about Hartlepool without talking about Wales. You can't talk about the fact that we're doing badly in Sunderland without talking about the fact that we've won the West of England and we won Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. You can't. So it is, yes, of course, we're disappointed. The progress isn't fast enough and we need to reconnect. And that's what Keir Starmer said. He's taken full responsibility and he's going to speed up the reforms in terms of both the party and in terms of the country. And we look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the months ahead. We've got a huge job to do in terms of recovering from this pandemic. We've got back on the park in Scotland. We've held 30 seats in Wales, which is extraordinary. And I think incumbency in terms of this pandemic has been helpful in terms of the Conservatives in England, the SNP in Scotland and the Labour Party in Wales. So we have to recognise the patchwork of these results without concentrating on the downsides and the upsides. We have to look at this sensibly, analyse what's gone wrong, analyse what's gone well and respond to that. That's what any sensible political party that wants to be a credible alternative government should be doing today.
You say that Keir Starmer's taking responsibility for the results. Is sacking Angela Rayner taking responsibility?
Well, this is another example of where we seem to be having political dialogue from social media. Angela Rayner hasn't been sacked, as I understand it. Angela Rayner has been offered a significant promotion to take her from the back office of the Labour Party running elections to the front office where she's talking to the country. So in actual fact, Angela Rayner, as I understand it, as I have been told, has not been sacked, but Keir Starmer has decided to do a reshuffle of his front bench to respond to those election results, to take Angela Rayner from the back office to the front office. I'm not aware of... She's a deputy leader of the party. She'll take a significant role in shadow cabinet. As I understand it, although I don't know the position, she's been offered a significant promotion that means she spends more time talking to the country about policy, using those great way that she communicates and using the mandate that she's got as deputy leader of the party. So that's essentially what's happened. Angela Rayner has not been sacked, but social media has blown up over the last 12 hours, to understand it. And I hope that Lotto I hope the leader's office will respond to that and do the reshuffle. And you'll show that this hasn't been a sacking, but actually a significant way of getting Angela Rayner from the back office to the front office of Labour politics.
You'll forgive me if I'm sceptical at the fact that this is now being spun as, a big promotion for Angela Rayner, when you can't even tell us what job she's going to go to. Maybe that's been scrambled right now by the leader of the opposition's office after seeing the reaction. We were being messaged yesterday, including myself, saying that Keir said he was taking full responsibility for the result of the elections, and he said we need to change. That means change how we run our campaigns in the future. This is not social media Twitter storm. This is coming from the leader of the opposition's office.
Yes, and the leader of the opposition hasn't just said that in messages to you, Sophie, in the media. He said it publicly, that he was taking full responsibility for these elections, and I think that's the right thing to do. Keir now deserves the opportunity to reshuffle his team, to reshuffle the policy, to speed up the reforms, to respond to what people have been telling us in these elections.
It's not just Twitter storm, then, is it?
But everyone's talking about people have been sacked. The leader of the Labour Party, if he takes responsibility for the elections, therefore takes responsibility for reshuffling the team, takes responsibility for reforming, takes responsibility for responding to those election results. That's what the leader should be doing. If he wasn't responding in that way, not taking responsibility, I'd be perfectly happy to be criticising as the same as Diane Abbot has just done, and you're quite obviously doing at the moment. But he's not. He's taking responsibility. He's resolving to do something about it, and that's what this reshuffle will be about.
I just want to show you a poll. It's coming up on screen now. I'll just read you through the results, just about whether or not the real problem is Keir Starmer. This was a poll that was carried out just before and on polling day this week, asking people for the main reason that they weren't voting Labour. 14% said it was because of Starmer leadership. That's the highest percentage of the 4 options that they were given. Is Keir Starmer the problem?
No, Keir Starmer has the responsibility now to turn that around. He's only been in power, he's only been leader of the Labour Party in that powerful position since the 4th of April last year. All we've done over the last 14 months has been swamped, rightly so, by the pandemic. He needs time to be able to develop that policy platform. He needs time as leader of the party to reshuffle the pack, respond to these elections, take responsibility. That's what he's doing. And hopefully because he's doing that, that 14% goes down to zero and people see Keir Starmer as being an alternative Prime Minister for this country. The country needs a strong opposition, but it also needs a credible alternative government. The Conservatives can't pretend that they've not been in power for the last 11 years. They can't pretend that the issues in Hartlepool that the voters have voted against the Labour Party for are the sole responsibility of the Labour Party. That's 11 years they've been in power, and they've got a responsibility as well to not break those promises that they're making to the electorate at the moment. So we've got to hold this government to account. We've got to show what the alternative is. We've got to have a positive policy platform, and that's what Keir Starmer's determined to do from these set of elections.
So what should Labour do now? What is the vision? What is the big, policy idea?
Well, it's got to be about what the future of the country looks like in a post-Brexit environment. We've got to make sure that...
What should it be? What is the vision for that?
Well, the vision's got to be about people's jobs. It's got to be about people's livelihoods. It's got to be about how we fund our public services. It's got to be about giving power to communities. It's got to be about investing in the places that felt they've been left behind. It's got to be about responding to what the ordinary voter wants. The ordinary voter wants a safe job. They want progression in the workplace. They want good pay. They want well rewarded. They want fairness. They want a safety net. They want their children to do well in school. These things aren't difficult. The policy platform to get us forward in terms of those narratives is the thing that needs to be worked on. But that's what we are determined to do, and that's what Keir is determined to put together in terms of both his team and the policy platform going forward.
OK. I just want to talk to you about Scotland as we finish. There's now a majority in the Scottish Parliament for independence, if you look at the Scottish National Party and also the Scottish Greens. So if the Scottish Parliament does pass legislation for another independence referendum, should the UK government take it to court, or should that be respected?
Well, let's go back to just before the election. There was also a pro-independence majority in the previous Scottish Parliament with the SNP and the Greens. So this isn't new. The SNP talked up getting a majority, said that would be the settled will of the Scottish people, and fell short from doing that. And the important thing to realise from these elections, which is critical for all sides of this debate, is that Scotland's completely split down the middle. In terms of the constituency vote, pro-independence parties just fell short of 50%, and on the regional list vote just got over 50%. So Scotland's completely and utterly split down the middle. The First Minister promised that this election would be about COVID recovery, and we will be holding her to that. And if she brings a bill to Parliament about a referendum, when she promised it would be about COVID recovery, we will certainly not support that. I can't talk for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said he would block a second independence referendum. The Conservatives campaigned on that, but it looks as if they probably will break their promise. And watching Michael Gove earlier, he didn't seem to want to answer the question at all about what the UK government would do. But what we are doing and what our MSPs will be doing when they go back to Parliament on Thursday is having a sole focus on what everyone promised at this election, which is COVID recovery. That's the priorities of the Scottish people. That's the priorities of our MSPs when they go back into that chamber, and it should be the priority for everyone. And both governments, the UK and the Scottish government, has to work together to make this work. Otherwise, Scotland and the rest of the UK will be much diminished. And if I could just reflect on what Mark Drakeford, the Labour First Minister in Wales, said after the election results this week. He said that he was going to go back into Parliament next week. He was going to concentrate fully on COVID recovery and show an aspirational, bright future for a radical Wales. Wouldn't it be great if that's what the First Minister said as well, instead of going back into this quagmire and this divisiveness of another second independence referendum that, quite frankly, is not the priority of the Scottish people at the moment?
OK. Ian Murray, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Thank you. It's Labour's Shadow Scotland Secretary Ian Murray there. Now, we know, of course, this morning that the Prime Minister has invited the leaders of the devolved nations to a summit on how Team UK, as he called it, can recover from the pandemic together. But the SNP's fourth Scottish Parliament election win in a row has seen the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon feeling more bullish than ever about vacating Scotland's seat at the UK table, even if her party fell one seat short of that crucial overall majority. Well, let's get more on this now. We're joined by the SNP's Deputy Leader, Keith Brown. Thank you very much for being with us. At the start of the campaign, there was a lot of optimism, shall we say, about the SNP getting that overall majority. You didn't manage to do it. It certainly would have made the push for a second referendum a bit easier, wouldn't it? Are you disappointed you fell short?
Disappointed in a historic fourth win for the SNP? No. I think at the start of a campaign you have three goals in mind. One is to win the election, which we did in spectacular fashion, to increase the number of votes that you have, which we've done. More votes at this election than any other parties ever achieved in the devolved Parliament, and also more seats. We won seats. The Tories lost seats, Labour lost seats. The SNP have done all these three things. And also, of course, there is an independence majority in the Parliament. So an astonishingly good result for the SNP and, I believe, for Scottish democracy.
You're talking there about the pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. We've been talking about it a lot on the show as well. A majority of MSPs support independence, if you look at the SNP and the Scottish Greens. But if you look at vote shares, the pro-independence parties won less than 50%, yourself and the Scottish Greens, and the anti-referendum parties won more than 50%. So on that basis, you know, one person, one vote, then actually would it be democratic to push for another referendum?
This is just an absolutely bizarre argument. David Cameron got around 36% of the vote when he took forward a Brexit referendum, of course against the wishes of people in Scotland. If the election that we had yesterday had been held at Westminster on constituencies, we'd have a majority of about 400. So the idea that in a parliamentary party election you don't have a mandate when the main party and other parties have more than 50% of the seats, it really comes down to a vote in the Parliament. And I didn't hear anybody saying during all the endless Brexit votes that we had when different parties voted for the same thing on many occasions, that invalidated the result. This is democracy. The SNP have done extremely well. We will have a majority for an independence referendum in the Parliament. But for the first 100 days, as has been made clear by the First Minister, we'll be concentrating on the recovery, the health service, education and the health of the people in Scotland.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're talking about focusing on the recovery. At what point do you start to push for another independence referendum? The reason I'm asking this question is it feels to me a little bit like the timeline is slipping, that it's in nobody's interest to do it right now, including your own. Is that fair? When do you want to see another referendum?
I think most people in the independence movement would want to see it as soon as possible, but they also realise that we're in the grip of a pandemic, and that is still a very real threat. We've seen a slight uptick in some areas in Scotland in recent days in terms of the incidence of coronavirus, and that's got to be the priority for everybody. I think all the parties have agreed on that. I think it's also true to say, though, that the election that we've just had was not a normal election, even though we had a fantastic increase in turnout. There wasn't the usual hustings, the public debates, the town hall meetings. And I think we'd all want to see, when there is to be the independence referendum, a much more full-blooded, engaged campaign on that issue. So we'll know when the public health situation is right, and the Scottish Parliament will take the decision as to exactly when that happens and when the referendum should be.
Can you not give us any guidance at all on when you think it would be the right time to, push for another referendum?
Well, I don't think you've seen anything different from Boris Johnson, Mark Drakeford or Nicola Sturgeon, who do not predict when the end of the pandemic is, because we know how unpredictable this disease is, and also because of the new variants as well. So it's a hostage to fortune to start putting a time limit on that, but we will know when it's over. We will know when it's safe to have that full-blooded campaign that I've mentioned. But until that happens, our concentration has to be focused on the pandemic, making sure that we drive down coronavirus and look after the public health of the people in Scotland.
Can you guarantee a referendum by the end of 2024, as you previously said?
Well, the only caveat to that, of course, would be the pandemic. But yes, that's our intention, is to have that referendum, I've said, as soon as possible. And we are making fantastic progress with the pandemic and the fight against coronavirus, as you can see in the figures now. But that threat is still there. And of course, there is also the threat of new variants of the virus. So nobody can put time limits on that. No politician is doing that just now. And it's unreasonable, I think, to ask them to do that. But at the earliest possible opportunity, when it's safe to do so, we will move to have the referendum, the one that Scotland has just voted for in massive numbers.
If Boris Johnson refuses to grant another referendum, or if the Supreme Court finds it would be illegal because it doesn't fall under the powers of the Scottish Parliament to move the legislation, what would you then do? Would you just hold an independence referendum anyway?
Well, first of all, I've never believed that Boris Johnson would continue to, as he would see it, veto Scottish democracy after the result of an election like the one we had yesterday. I've never believed that would be the case. And I think you're seeing already some changing language from the UK government, which was inevitable. It's also true to say that Boris Johnson is a man that's not a stranger to U-turns. If you think about just his manifesto at the recent election, he said he wouldn't reduce the size of the armed forces and then promptly did. He signed an international treaty which he then renounced pretty much as soon as he'd signed it. So Boris Johnson will change to take account of the political circumstances in Scotland. And we will proceed with the referendum. The referendum will happen. It's going to happen. I think the Conservatives, many of whom I've spoken to, understand that's the case. The only issue is when the time is right, and the time will be right when it's safe to have that referendum.
I understand that, you don't believe Boris Johnson, but I'm not asking you what you think Boris Johnson will do. I'm asking what you will do. If either the Supreme Court says the referendum would be, effective and illegal one, or if Boris Johnson refuses to grant it, would you hold a referendum anyway in those circumstances?
Well, you'd asked me to jump past what I don't believe, and I don't believe that Boris Johnson will, as you say, veto this. So I don't think that's going to happen. So you're now into a hypothetical situation. And of course, it wouldn't be the Scottish Government that would be taking legal action. The Scottish Government will proceed if the Scottish Parliament votes for the referendum. We would like to do that on the basis of a Section 30 agreement. That makes sure it's all agreed as it was back in 2014 or previously 2012 with David Cameron. We'd like to do it on that basis. That's the right way to do it. And I believe that will happen. I think that's what's going to happen. But in the event that there's any denial of Scottish democracy, in the event that Boris Johnson tries to do a Trump and try and use the legal process to subvert Scottish democracy, I believe the referendum will still happen.
OK, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown there. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. We've been discussing the results, of course, of the 2021 elections, talking to the Labour Party about their performance. We can focus now on what happened with the Liberal Democrats. We can talk to their leader, Sir Ed Davey, who joins us now in the studio. Thank you very much for being with us. Not much sign of a Lib Dem resurgence, was there?
Well, Liberal Democrats scored 17% of the national vote. And for nearly 1 in 5 voters to vote Liberal Democrat, I think is a good result. And it wasn't just the 17% that Liberal Democrats scored, it was where we scored them. We made gains from both Labour and Conservative, but particularly against the Conservatives, in Tory heartlands, from Cambridgeshire to Surrey to Hertfordshire to Wiltshire. We made gains in Stockport from the Tories in the north, Wokingham, Guildford. And the significance of these gains, Sophie, is that they're the sorts of council areas where we can take that to Westminster level, and we can win the constituencies. And I think that makes progress. I mean, my mission as Liberal Democrat leader is to make the Liberal Democrats as strong as possible to defeat as many Conservative MPs at the next election as possible. And judged on that mission, on Thursday night, we made real progress.
Do you think that you're setting your standards a bit low here, though, genuinely? Like, if you really think that it was real progress for your party, the results that happened before, I mean, you're starting from an incredibly low base here. You're down a seat in Scotland, you're down council seats in England, you made zero progress in Wales in terms of seats. You're pushing to 4th place in the London mayoral race. I mean, don't you need to front up and take a bit more responsibility than that?
Well, first of all, your analysis of the council seats is a little bit early for you, if you don't mind me saying so. There's still council seats to be counted, and we've got real areas where we're strong in places like Oxfordshire and St Albans. But I said when I became the leader of the Liberal Democrats 8 months ago that we had some real challenges, and I'm happy to repeat that to you today.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah, but we've made progress. That's my point. In 8 months, I set myself the task that at these elections, we would make progress in the areas that we needed to win in the next general election, where we can beat Conservative MPs. And in large parts of the country now, it's really clear, if you want to beat the Conservatives, you vote Liberal Democrat. And, people have been talking about the red wall and the Conservatives chipping at the red wall. There's a blue wall in the Conservative heartlands, and Liberal Democrats are chipping away at that blue wall, and I want those to be our new heartlands.
In that blue wall, though, the chips you're making are pretty small. They're not like, massive hammer blows yet, are they? And this is the Conservative Party been in power for 11 years. The Labour Party, we've discussed, are in an existential crisis. This should be a golden opportunity for you guys, shouldn't it? And yet here you are, just making a couple of gains here and there, taking the odd council to no overall control. I mean, shouldn't you be setting your sights a bit higher than this?
Well, do we want to make even more progress? Of course we do. But this is solid progress. I mean, the 7 gains in Wiltshire was a really highlight. The 5 gains in Cambridgeshire, we took, as you say, power away from the Conservatives. These are areas of our strengths. And, I go back to key areas where we have real prospects to beat Conservative MPs in the next election. Places like Cheadle and Hazel Grove, like Guildford. These are places where we made real progress. And so if you're thinking about next general election, which indeed Sky was doing, your own political reporter, Sam Coates, when he was showing that we won 17% of the vote, he was making the point that it's Liberal Democrats eating into the Conservative vote. And in your own projections, you don't see the Greens winning any seats. You see Labour winning a few seats. You see Liberal Democrats winning more seats against the Conservatives.
Yeah, but that's because you do very well, usually, in local elections, normally a lot better than this.
Well, we are very strong in local government, you're right. We've got over 2,500 councillors across the country, and local government is very important to what Liberal Democrats are about. But we have to rebuild that base, as we did on Thursday night, so that we can then translate that into victories against the Conservatives at the next general election. So, I think in that frame, in that mission that we've set ourselves, we made real progress.
How concerned are you by the Green Party? I know you say that the projection shows they wouldn't win seats, but at the same time, they had a pretty good night, didn't they? And in some areas, they pushed you into a distant 4th place. They put on a considerable number of seats. Are you worried that the Green parties are starting to emerge as the traditional, Liberal Democrat Party, where if you don't like the Labour or the Conservatives and you vote Lib Dems, well, now it looks like people might be increasingly voting Green?
I'm not worried because there were over 500 Liberal Democrat councillors elected on Thursday night and just 100-odd Green councillors. So we remain far stronger than the Greens.
But if you look at the progress that the Greens have been making is dramatically better than the Lib Dems.
Well, I have to say, it's the number of councillors you got elected. That's the real bar, and on that we completely overwhelmed the Greens. And the key thing is, for the next general election...
If it's just on the number of councillors, then you would say Labour had had a stonking night, which is clearly not the case, is it?
But the point is, at the next general election, which is the party that can beat Conservative MPs? And it's pretty clear from Sky's own analysis, not mine, from Sam Coates from Sky, that it's the Liberal Democrats. If you want to beat Conservative MPs in large swathes of England, Liberal Democrats are building our strength to be able to do that. And I really hope people recognise that, because I know there are Green voters who, yes, they vote Green in 1 or 2 local elections, but they know that in parliamentary constituencies across England, it's the Liberal Democrats that have a powerful vote in the first past the post system to beat the Conservatives.
I want to talk to you about Scotland, one of the really huge issues that has emerged from these elections. There's now a majority for independence supporting parties in Holyrood. If the Scottish Parliament votes for another independence referendum, should the UK government grant that?
Well, Willie Rennie and the Scottish Liberal Democrats fought this election campaign against a second independence referendum. We made the argument, in fact, I think we were the first party to do it, that we should be putting the recovery first. We've had the deepest economic recession for 300 years, the worst health crisis for 100 years. And Liberal Democrats made the argument that Scottish people are worried about their health, their care, their jobs, their businesses. And I think that is absolutely the issue now confronting Scotland, confronting, frankly, the whole of the United Kingdom. And so Liberal Democrats will say to whoever, please put recovery first. That's in the interest of the people we are elected to represent.
It feels like I'm getting the same answer from everyone about recovery first, from Michael Gove, from Keith Brown, from yourself. The question that I'm trying to get to is, if the Scottish Parliament votes in favour of another referendum, should the UK government grant it? I'm struggling to get a straight answer from anyone. I wonder, can you help me? Come on.
Well, you're right. It is Boris Johnson who has to make that decision. And I'm not sure if he's going to be picking up the phone to myself to ask my opinion. But what I can say is Liberal Democrats fought that election against an independence referendum. That is our democratic mandate. That is our position. Our position is, with the economy and the health of our country in such dire straits, we need to be focusing on the people's concerns. And, I really worry that if we have years of division, dividing Scotland, dividing the United Kingdom, that will undermine the recovery.
So even if the Scottish Parliament votes for another referendum, you don't think it should happen? Is that the position?
Well, we fought against that. And,
well, I know the manifesto that you fought on, but
Willie
what's
Rennie,
the question?
Willie Rennie and the Liberal Democrat MSPs that have been elected, and by the way, Willie Rennie got the best ever constituency result of any Scottish MSP ever, so he got a really strong mandate for the case he was making. We saw Alex Cole-Hamilton in Edinburgh West did really well.
The question is, if the Scottish Parliament votes for another referendum, should that go ahead?
The point I was making is that Liberal Democrat MSPs who got really good results in their constituencies have a mandate to oppose that. And I'm not going to undermine the case they made so well in their constituencies across Scotland that recovery should come first.
OK, just finally, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Keir Starmer. Difficult day for Labour, of course, with those election results. Does he need to think about his position?
Listen, I think all opposition parties had a tough time on Thursday night. I think it's becoming, most commentators are admitting that it was the incumbents that did well, whether it's the Labour Party in Wales, the SNP in Scotland, or the Conservative in Westminster. Because not surprisingly, voters kept seeing them on their TVs throughout the whole pandemic. And that has made it more difficult to campaign. And for the Liberal Democrats, normally we are out there campaigning, knocking on people's doors, getting our messages over. That's where we are strong. And, I'm absolutely delighted, actually, by the fact we still got 17% of the national vote, despite the fact we weren't able to campaign, that we still made these massive gains against the Conservatives in key areas for us in the next general election.
Questions about Keir Starmer.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is I have some sympathy with opposition parties who had the same challenges that Liberal Democrats had. Now, actually, Liberal Democrats, despite those challenges, made progress.
OK, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Sir Ed Davey there, thank you very much. Well, that's it for this week's edition of Sophy Ridge on Sunday. But do join us after the break for Sophy Ridge The Take, where we are going to be talking over everything that we've just heard from our interviews with our political correspondent, Rob Powell. So don't go anywhere.